So hello and welcome to our webinar today, our global webinar about plastics in the supply chain. We are Action Sustainability Community Interest Company. I'm Shaun McCarthy, a director of that business. This is a business funded by my trading company, Action Sustainability Trading Limited, and it was born out of the work that many of us did, and some of you I see on the call that were part of the committee developing the ISO 2400.org standard. So we sponsor a website called ISO 2400.org. We are a not-for-profit organisation. We don't buy anything, we don't sell anything, and everything that we offer up on our website by way of learning is free of charge. You are welcome to join the website as a contributor, to contribute your own experiences, your own case studies, etc., around sustainability and procurement from around the world. There's also a self-assessment tool on the website which you can use, where you ask 20 questions of your organisation, and that gives you some idea of how well aligned you are to the ISO 2400 standard. So this morning's session is all about plastics around the world, and you know, it's single-use plastics are becoming much more in the social consciousness, the awareness around ocean plastics, the awareness around the unsustainability of plastic products. We've got three fantastic speakers today, and then we've got me, and I'm going to cover off first a fairly boring topic, and then no pressure whatsoever on the other speakers to be more interesting. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so what I would like to talk about is a development in the UK around a tax on plastic packaging. So for those of you joining from the UK, if it's not something you're aware of, it's probably something that you do need to be aware of. For those that are joining outside the UK, this is really some information about a trend that's happening here, but also potentially trends that are happening in other countries. What we're going to do very briefly is to talk about the Budget 2020 announcement around a tax on plastic packaging, the scope and the liability of the tax and the evidence requirements. This is legislation that is still in consultation. So it looks like from April 2022, there'll be a tax charged on plastic packaging manufactured in the UK or imported in the UK that contains less than 30% recycled plastics. So this is quite a significant move, a significant development, taxed at the rate of £200 per tonne. There's a lot of consultation around imported filled plastic packaging, and smaller businesses handling less than 10 tonnes of plastic packaging would not be liable. So we're not putting a burden onto small businesses that would be disproportionate to the size of that business. The scope, so the positions around consultation at the moment, 30% recycled plastic will be applied on a packaging per component basis. Multi-material plastic needs to look at plastic predominantly by weight. It will include filled plastic packaging, following feedback from a previous consultation. Some consultation around post-consumer recycled material and pre-consumer material. How do we define that? Various methods of recycling are permissible. Some things where the jury is still out, being very precise about the definition of terms. When we say plastic, you know, that's a very good broad thing to talk about, but do we actually understand what we mean when we say plastic? There are some thoughts as well about exclusion, for instance, for medicines, and should the tax apply in that case. So still quite a lot of discussion going on. We in the Supply Chain Sustainability School have participated in that discussion and that consultation. So liability, so there's a question of who pays. So the tax is chargeable when the material is converted into packaging. Where it occurs overseas, then the importer would be liable. But there are some questions then around precisely how it will be charged and precisely who is the chargeable person. And when we start to think about warehousing, packaging, moving, at what point in the value chain is the tax charged? And then thinking about within the value chain, what about online marketplaces and fulfillment houses? How should they be conducting sufficient due diligence on chargeable plastic waste? So immediately you go from the principle of it's a good idea to charge a tax on single-use plastics in order to reduce them and encourage recycling. It starts to get quite complicated quite quickly. So then there's the evidence requirements, and this is probably the most tricky thing. How do organizations that are liable for the tax actually collect the data? What information do they require? How are they going to collect it? How are they going to analyze it? How are we going to how are we going to calculate the proportion of recycled plastic? And what evidence and due diligence is going to be required? Matt's going to be picking up in his presentation around this whole subject and actually what's being done in the UK housing sector to at least make a start ahead of the legislation, to make a start on gathering some data around the various plastic streams in the supply chain, what plastic is actually coming into the value chain and what should we do with it. And I think what we've seen so far is to suggest this is something that's going to be very challenging for our supply chains. It's certainly not an easy subject, but it's one that hopefully as we start to tackle this in the UK and we can share around the world, you know, some of the findings that we have and some of the challenges that we have in gathering the data, providing the evidence and doing the necessary due diligence to comply with this requirement. This is what's happening in the UK. This is why it's potentially very challenging for businesses to comply, and Matt will be talking a little bit more about how we're going to tackle that and how we're going to deal with it. And I'm going to hand over to Nicola to share and to talk about transparency and value.
Thank you very much. So my name is Nicola Hudson. I'm a senior sustainability consultant. I'm from a company called D&VGL, and simply put, we're here to try and build and protect value. And fitting with this, which is why people like myself come on board who work in sustainability and innovation and collaborating in external discussions such as this today. Relevant to today, we work extensively on supply chain issues and looking at how trust can be built in the value chain from the source, such as plastic, through to the consumer. So for pretty well every producer, manufacturer and retailer today, the issue of plastics and packaging is a boardroom issue. And there's a race to try and catch up with consumer expectations. It's well known that trying to turn reclaimed plastic from trash into value is really critical for cleaning up our oceans and rivers. But there's a plethora of initiatives, different labelling claims on the market today, as you may be aware, and I would like you all to just take a moment and to think how many different type of claims or initiatives can you think which are out there that are trying to say that plastics are from the ocean or 100% recycled plastic from the ocean. Really try and think about, have they verified the origin of plastic from the ocean? When you come to think about it, you realise that there's quite a lot out there and it gets confusing. One thing which we're seeing on the marketplace is that there's little traceability or full traceability to back up these claims. And I'm not going to go into too much detail now, but the underlying point I want to make is, as a consumer, you tend to try and trust and believe what is said to you, but there's no way really to know these products are what they say. So consumers want to know that the item they receive at the end for the goods are actually made from plastics removed from the ocean, and they need to be able to trust those claims. So products must be future fit, but underlying that, there needs to be some form of compliance in order to make these claims transparent and robust. And this requires a focus on traceability. So this is where our journey began. Because there are not yet many initiatives claiming full traceability of ocean plastics and products made from ocean plastic, we've engaged with the likes of the Great Ocean Cleanup, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. And what they wanted to do was to really look at how to fill this gap. So how can we develop a certification for a traceability system that can be used to improve the claims for the origin or source of plastics? How can we make that authenticity verifiable? So that's what we worked with them to do. And what was interesting is that through this process, there was so much collaboration, and I think it's important to stress, to solve large issues such as these and to really drive home a transparent and circular process, there has to be collaboration to help really work out how can we verify the origin and authenticity of plastic is from the oceans. Having a reliable mechanism, such as certification, is one thing, which can help build up customer trust and ensuring the traceability of processes to verify products or packaging are actually made from plastic from the ocean. But what about the compliance part? We've just had a discussion around the upcoming changes in UK plastic tax. So when we think about the compliance aspects associated with green claims as a whole, this is also needed to help build trust with consumers. It helps give a voice as to know that what is being claimed and advocated is compliant with law. Now, interestingly, if we go from a UK to an EU level now, the European guidance on green claims requires, for instance, a scientific approach to be used to support claims around either the environmental impacts from what is that negative value from your production process, but to also looking at that relevant and meaningful claim of what you're saying is actually representative of your definition. And is it a whole part of a process or parts of that process you're claiming against? But then also to have full disclosure of the criterion you've adopted to verify your claim, it requires that third-party auditing. So again, this is another level of how to voice transparency in the process. We've spoken about trust, consumer trust, and traceability. That transparency aspect does also get impacted through green claims, through legislation. And again, there's a plethora out there from an international, European, and UK level. So for these reasons, and due to a lack of robust practice in the field of ocean plastic traceability, which calls for a reliable mechanism, a lack of transparent and robust certification and assurance tools to help sustain those claims, and there really a need to build that consumer trust and to really stay on par with existing and current EU laws and regulations. What we then went off to do, and where our interests have gone, stemming on from work with the Great Ocean Cleanup, is to look at how we can enhance our certification for the traceability system for ocean plastics. And what's important to note here, as I just mentioned with partnerships, is that external references which can help standards and certificates become more transparent are important. So what we've drawn on through our process is to span from ISO standards to specific initiatives in plastic waste management, chain of custody, and assurance of product claims. So all these elements have a story, they have a voice, and together they're far, far stronger. And I mean, our mechanism, similar to what I just showed on the Great Ocean Cleanup, is based on a few core principles from, again, that origin, looking at materials and scope, looking at supply chain players. So what's the next element? What can enhance the traceability and transparency of a process and a claim for ocean plastics? This digitalization, of course, very hot topic at the moment. And what has been interesting is, in addition to the physical inspections and audits that can go on in a process to verify ocean plastics, for a robust certification process, there's a possibility to utilize and really embrace digitalization to ensure claims being made are actually representative and true, and really to help try and improve traceability. So again, it's how can we make things more credible? A blockchain platform, for instance, can help make data gathering far more efficient and transparent. It can help to manage and validate mass balances of data. You can utilize digital tagging systems, for instance, to help trace where plastic's going. And again, helping to increase that level of awareness as well as the assurance. You can leverage different digital disruptive technologies to help transform from a linear to a more circular economic model. As we know, circular economy is an ambitious topic which a lot of different sectors are working towards. But it helps with connectivity. So I mentioned at the start, the need to be engaging with partners within a system to make this process more transparent and to actually move towards circular economy. So using remote technologies and then connecting with different analytical tools and platforms and apps can also support you on that journey. So in sum, there are a lot of different factors which go into really to drive transparency and trust when making ocean plastic claims. And it's a journey which can't be navigated individually, and it has to be done together to build consumer trust, to be compliant with European law, and to make things traceable. And I know there's going to be a speech shortly by the fellow speakers who are on today, who will take a bit of a deep dive into more of the data parts and how that can be tackled. So thank you very much all for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nikki. And if we can hand over then to Anne to run the next presentation and start to get into a more practical example of how this works.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Anne-Sophie, and I'm representing ReSee Project today, and I'm going to talk a bit about how we work at ReSee Project. ReSee Project is a fairly young company. We were founded last year in 2019. We are a Danish company, and I myself is Danish, but we are operating from Indonesia, and we are catering to a full global market. I myself have been with ReSee Project since the beginning of the company's history, and today I am the head of business development at ReSee Project. ReSee Project is a purpose-driven company, and what we do is that we collect plastic waste from oceans and rivers, and we do this on behalf of other companies around the world. These are companies who want to make a really great positive impact on our environment, and who wants to forefront and provide a sustainable future for our planet. ReSee Project was born out of a very simple mission, and that mission is to create a future where we have a plastic-free ocean. And I say that this is a simple mission, but it's quite obvious that this is not a simple or an easy endeavor to take on. So this is why we at ReSee Project believe that it's only if we all join forces that we will be able to reach this goal in the future of having a plastic-free ocean. And this is also why we are engaging companies all over the world, larger and smaller companies, in our mission. Before I will get into exactly how we try to motivate companies to get involved and to finance that we do plastic collection on their behalf, I will explain a little bit more about how we work on a more practical level. Our plastic collection takes place in Indonesia. Indonesia is one of the countries in the world where most plastic is entering the oceans every day. Currently, we are operating in the greater Jakarta area, and we have plans to scale to other locations in the country and also to other countries in general. What we do in Jakarta is that we engage low-income communities in our plastic collection. The plastic collectors who are working for us, they sail out in small boats to river and ocean areas and collect the plastic from the water pretty much on a daily basis. The plastic that they collect is hereafter sorted, and we then transport the plastic to local recycling stations, from where the plastic is further distributed for plastic waste handling and for recycling. So what we do to motivate companies to engage in our ocean plastic collection is that we provide three key services. We provide a documented process, we provide trackable data, and we provide engaging content. We document and register every single step of the plastic collection process, from the moment that the plastic collector takes the plastic out of the water and until the plastic is handed over for recycling. On top of this, we have now started a certification process with DNVGL, from where you just heard Nicolas speak. DNVGL has developed the world's first certification standard for ocean plastic collection, And we are very proud to be one of the first companies in the world to start this certification process. What we also do is that we provide our customers with data from the plastic collection that we do on their behalf. This means that as a company committing to ocean plastic collection through ReSea project, you will be able to track not only the amount of plastic that you are removing from the ocean, but also exactly when and where the plastic was collected. This is trackable data that you then again can share with your customers. Reliable data is definitely a key element in what motivates companies to join our mission for a plastic-free ocean. But to be able to share the story of the difference you as a company is doing for the oceans, you also need to make it relatable to your own customers. So this is why we produce engaging content to our customers, including photos and videos of their exact plastic collection and the collectors who are engaged in it. One of the main reasons that we have found to why companies choose to engage in our ocean plastic cleanup is that we are combining efforts of environmental impact with efforts of social impact. We believe that if we are to make a substantial difference to plastic pollution, we need to work from the root of the problem. One of the big issues with plastic pollution in countries such as Indonesia is the lack of resources in low-income areas. This is resulting in very poor waste management and unfortunately in littering of plastic waste directly into rivers and streams. This, I believe, is a good example of the fact that the plastic waste problem is inherently a human problem, and therefore both environmental and social action needs to be taken. By employing local people to do the plastic collectors for us at ReSea Project, we try to tackle this problem by making the waste itself a valuable resource. The collectors who are working for ReSea Project are increasing their income when they are collecting plastic for us, and this makes it possible for them to provide better for their families and, for example, to provide better education for their children. I wanted to share with you a couple of examples of exactly how we are combining the documented process, the trackable data, and the engaging content in the offering that we provide to our customers. First, we produce videos and photo content that can be used for social media of the plastic collection that we do on the company's behalf. This includes, for example, video greetings with the collectors and their families where they talk about the collection of plastic that they do. And this really creates a closeness to the work that's being done that really resonates. We also invite companies to join us in Indonesia and visit their location, their exact plastic waste collection location. This is, of course, difficult in these pandemic times with the COVID-19. But we hope, of course, to be able to get started on this again once the world starts opening up. In the end, also what we do is that we make all data about the plastic collection fully available to our customers so that they again can share it with their customers. For example, we do this via a QR code that can be printed on the product or the packaging of the company. And with a smartphone, it gives the end user buying the product a complete insight into the plastic collection that is being done because of this product. Today, working towards more sustainable ways of doing business is no longer a choice for companies. And most companies know this already. It is something that the world and therefore the global market demands. But as many of you are maybe familiar with or know about, the road to a more sustainable business model can be very long, it can be difficult, costly, and it can pose many obstacles along the way. So what we offer is a way where companies can make an instant positive impact on the environment. This definitely motivates companies to join our fight for a plastic-free ocean. And in return for their commitment, we get to scale up our operation and remove larger and larger amounts of plastic waste every day. I will end today's speak from my end with a quote that I think sums up what I've been talking about today. It's from Forbes magazine from 2018. And it says that 92% of consumers will be more likely to trust a company that supports social or environmental issues. At VC Project, we believe that this is a very positive development in the market, and it is also definitely a driver to why VC Project is able to collect larger and larger amounts of plastic, and which we of course also hope to be able to do in the future. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me.
And Sophie, thank you very much for what is a really inspirational presentation. I really love the kind of connectivity that you have between the social and environmental impacts, and it's a great example to us all. So I'm going to hand over now to our final speaker, Matt Nichols from Reconomy.
Firstly, thanks, Shaun, for the opportunity to speak to the audience today, and also thanks to the other speakers. So inevitably, hopefully what I'm going to talk to you about, which I'll explain in a second, has got some real resonance with the content of the other two presentations that you've just heard. So as the slide says there, I'm Matt Nichols. I'm the chair of the Supply Chain Sustainability School Waste Group, and that Supply Chain Sustainability School, for those of you who don't know, is an organisation that was set up by Shaun and is operating in the UK and has a significant presence now across the UK construction sector, and is really driving sustainability in a significant way. I'm also a director of Reconomy, which is a waste management group, again operating in the UK. So what am I going to talk about today? It's an initiative that's been set up within the Supply Chain School with Zero Waste Scotland, and is focusing on reducing packaging waste within the construction sector. So that's packaging waste in its entirety, but obviously within that, plastics is a significant part of that. So why is that important? What I've tried to illustrate here are just some stats, and bear in mind, you know, I'm familiar with the waste market in the UK, and I found some of these statistics quite startling. So for those of you who are maybe less familiar, hopefully similar impact on you. But we used in 2018, these stats relate to 5 million tons of plastic in the UK. So just to try and get some sort of context around that, that's roughly 15 times the weight of the Empire State Building. So 5 million tons. Similarly, we disposed of 3.7 million tons of plastic in 2018. So 3/4 of the weight of that we used, we then disposed of in the same year. Right? So again, just try and get your head around those volumes, quite difficult. But to try and bring that more into something that you'd be able to relate to, what we then looked at was, I don't know about you, but it always astounds me when I'm dutifully taking my recycling waste from my house and putting it in the recycling bin on my drive. Never ceases to amaze me the amount of packaging waste that we generate just in our house. And I always think to myself, how can it possibly be we've got this much waste to put into the recycling bin? I only emptied this yesterday. Yeah? So think of that in your own household. And then in the UK, there are circa 28 million households, all presumably generating a very similar amount of waste. Yeah? So the waste, your household, multiply that by 28 million. That's quite difficult to get your head around. But then multiply that again by 3. And the UK construction industry generates 3 times as much packaging waste as all UK households combined. That was the stat that completely blew me away, if I'm honest. It's quite mind-boggling. So then let's try and make this very relevant to plastics. What we know is that roughly 25% of all construction packaging waste is plastic. And if you then relate that and do the sums, that means roughly 50,000 tons of plastic packaging waste is generated in the UK by the construction sector alone. And again, to try and put that in context for you, that's about 4 times the weight of the Brooklyn Bridge. Then relate that to 40% of that 50,000 tons, i.e. 20,000 tons, is going straight to landfill. So it isn't recycled, it isn't diverted from landfill and recovered into energy, it simply goes to landfill. And again, to put that in context for you, that's twice the weight of the Eiffel Tower. So the idea of those stats is just to get you some sort of a gauge of the scale of the issue. Why is it then that some 60%, we're only actually diverting 60%, and therefore 40% of that waste is going to landfill? There's a number of reasons for that. And bear in mind, this is construction. So partly it's because the product on construction sites is poorly segregated. So if you imagine you're trying to recycle a plastic or a cardboard or whatever it may happen to be that's contaminated with mud, for example, or plaster, for example, or any other form of building type contamination. So poor segregation is a major impact on it. But similarly, so are the fact that the materials themselves are often made from polymers which are difficult to recycle. And for a client, whether that's the builder or whether that's the architects or whoever, to currently discern which products are easily recyclable and which products are more difficult to recycle, very difficult for them to identify which of those it is. The other issue at the moment is that there simply isn't the capacity within the UK to actually do that recycling. And linking this back to Anne-Sophie's presentation, a lot of UK recycling products previously went to China. China made that much more difficult to export recycled product to them probably in the last 2 years. And as a result of that, a significant amount of our recycling waste that we don't have the capacity to handle ourselves goes to Indonesia. So all of that links very tightly to what the previous speakers have been talking about. So what's clear though is that we can do better. There are other countries who are already doing better. So these statistics, they're not directly comparable to the ones I was showing you previously, but they're related. So if you look in Germany, for example, the total construction and demolition waste volumes just over 200 million tons. That would include, though, that's all construction demolition waste. So it's not just packaging, and therefore that would include inert materials, so brick and block and soils, etc. So that would make a big impact on the tonnage. But impressively, 90% of those products are recycled. So that's not diverted from landfill, that's recycled. So, and that's an important distinction. It's not about just diverting from landfill, it's genuinely about recycling. And if you look at the percentage of plastic waste which is recycled, in Germany, 80% of the plastic waste is recycled. And the closest equivalent stat we can get from the UK is that 60% of our plastic waste is diverted. And that's diverted as opposed to recycled. So the point is that there are other countries who are doing it significantly better. Those other countries are similar in their development to the UK. So it's very clear that it's within our grasp to be able to significantly improve where we are today. So what are we going to do about it, and what's the initiative that I'm talking about? The UK construction market obviously is a major contributor, as we saw within those initial statistics, to packaging waste and therefore plastic waste within the UK. And within the UK construction market, some very large players is within the house building sector. Interestingly, over the last 5 years or more, there's been a consolidation of large players in the housing market. So what do I mean by that? So a bigger and bigger proportion of the UK housing estate is being built by fewer large players. So the initiative that we're kicking off actually is working with 3 of the 4 largest house builders in the UK. And that was very important relative to what we're trying to achieve. And the approach that we're going to take is to identify on major materials that are used within house building and the major suppliers of those materials. So what we know from economy's involvement in the house building sector is that there is, relative to other aspects of construction, there is a relatively repetitive range of products supplied by a relatively small number of large suppliers. And the intention is that we will gather the data SKU by SKU, so stock keeping unit, individual product, if you like, and we will gather the packaging data related to those individual SKUs. So that's the type of packaging, whether that be plastic, whether that be cardboard, whether it be wood, whether it be glass, whether it be metal, etc. The weight of that packaging, the volume of that packaging that is attributed to an individual product. So having captured that information, we'll store that information within a database. And having got that information, we'll then multiply it up by the volume of those items that have been installed by individual builders. The impact of that is that we can then ultimately go back up the supply chain and talk to the distributors and the manufacturers of those products to say, this is the volume of waste that's been attributed to the products that you're supplying. What can we do to either negate that waste altogether, to improve the recyclability of that waste, and or to look at different ways of delivering that product, so that actually we might get, as one of the other speakers was talking about, a circular economy, so that that material is reused and reused and reused. The positive news about this is that the system that we're going to use, which is a company called Valpak, and their Insight platform, has been used to a great extent and very effectively within the UK retail sector for the last 10 to 15 years. So most of the UK retailers use that exact same platform. The reality is, if you've gone back 10, 15 years, the scale of what was being tackled was equally daunting as when we're talking to the house builders today and the suppliers today. So trying to gather that information SKU by SKU and build up that database was, you can imagine, a massively daunting task for all the UK retailers 10, 15 years ago, and yet they did it. And yet here they are 10 to 15 years later on with a significantly better handle on what materials are being produced, where they're coming from, and what they can do about it to improve the situation. Like most circumstances, it's about the data. If you've got the data, then you can enter into an objective conversation with the suppliers and the distributors to say, these are the materials that are attributed to your product. These are the costs that are being attributed to that. Therefore, let's go about it in a different way. They say that timing is all, and I think we're in an excellent situation for some of the reasons that Shaun touched on in his very first presentation. So as you heard then, the plastics tax is coming into the UK in April 2022. And the impact of that tax will be significant for those people who are involved in generating that packaging and putting that packaging into the market. And this is, for me, one of those rare occasions when doing the right thing from an environmental perspective actually isn't potentially going to be in conflict with the fact that it will cost you more to do it. I think it's going to be one of those rare occasions where the commercial teams within businesses will be looking at the impact of tax and saying, we need to reduce the amount of packaging and specifically the amount of plastics packaging that we're producing, because otherwise the liability for us is going to be significant come April 2022. Therefore, what can we do about it? And it's against that background that businesses like Reconomy, Taylor Wimpey, Barratt's, and the other big house builders we're talking to will be going to those same suppliers and saying, work with us to reduce those. So I think from our point of view, environmentally, it's the right thing to do. Those businesses will also need the data that we're asking for and we're going to make available to them to make their tax submissions. So one, just to produce the submissions in the first place, they're going to need that data. But secondly, it's in everybody's interest, both environmentally and commercially, to reduce the amount of plastics that are being generated. So hopefully, everybody will perceive this as a win-win, and you don't get that situation where commercial functions are pulling in the opposite direction to environmental and sustainability functions. The final slide, this is just a screenshot from the Insight platform. And if we had the time today, we could have drilled into this and I could have shown you some more of the slides. But this is just an indicator that demonstrates what you're able to see on that platform once you've gathered the data is a breakdown by different product stream. So as you see there, whether that be glass, paper, plastics, wood, steel, aluminium, it compares it then to previous years, and it enables you to see which individual supplier is generating those volumes. If we were able to then click into plastics, for example, you can drill down further, and what that would identify for you is the type of the plastics that's being generated and the extent and ease to which that product is recyclable. So as a very easy example to relate to, shrink wrap, you might imagine, is a product that's used extensively when transporting building materials around the UK, holding it onto pallets, keeping it in place, etc. But the reality is, currently, there are different shrink wrap brands that use different polymers. Some of those polymers readily recyclable in the UK, other of those polymers far less recyclable in the UK. So the first objective would be to dispense with the use of that product altogether. But in reality, if that proves to be impractical, the second objective would be to say, okay, how do we ensure that we use the product that's more easily recyclable and we use less of the products that's more difficult to recycle? So that's the type of approach that we're taking. We are at the very early stages of this so far. So we've identified the 3 major builders that we're going to work with. We've got the support of the Supply Chain School of Zero Waste Scotland. We're now entering into the gathering of the data stage. Once we've gathered the data, we'll populate the database, and then we'll go back and start the conversations with those key suppliers to say, right, in light of this objective information, what can we do to improve the situation? So as Shaun suggested, it's quite a daunting task, it's quite complicated, but I also think it fits very neatly with the content of what the other speakers were talking about. So this is the UK, but what's happening in the UK has a direct impact on what's happening in Indonesia, and the data that we're using needs to be trusted, it needs to be verifiable, and we need to be able to demonstrate to people objectively the improvements and the benefits that are being seen. So that was, in the space of just roughly over 10 minutes, I think, what I wanted to talk about today. As with the other speakers, any questions you've got, please feel free to fire them in. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Matt, and thanks to all of our speakers. It's been a fascinating run through, everything from the implications of the tax in the UK to a big global a big global social and environmental initiative, thinking about traceability and some of the tools that we might use, and then the actual practicalities on the ground in the construction sector. So yeah, great. Thank you very much for all of those speakers. So we have one question from Tricia. I'm working with a company who recycles exactly the type of waste Matt's talking about into construction material for benches, decking, agricultural poles, etc. It's really tough to get the business case to work in the UK without some kind of grant or sponsorship funding. Anyone got any tips on how to break through this barrier, as it's a great circular story for the construction sector? Matt, do you have any thoughts on that question?
So with regards to where you might go to approach to get funding, to be honest, I don't know. I'm not sure on that. But what I would say is that actually gathering the information that identifies, okay, where is that product coming from and therefore what might we do to reduce that product in the first instance. That's really the key objective of the initiative that I've just been talking about. There are numerous other activities and businesses around the UK that will make recycled products from recovered plastics, etc. Not necessarily from ocean plastics, but just recovered plastics. But by all means, if you want to make contact with me, I can put you in touch with some of those companies.
A couple of questions from me, and I will pick up any questions in the chat as they come through. Nikki, I suspect, like many people, blockchain is a little bit of a mystery to me. Do you have any examples? You talked about use of blockchain in traceability. Do you have any examples of how blockchain might be used to improve traceability generally, to make it come alive for people like me who don't quite get it?
Sure. I mean, if I take from a very simple level of not talking in plastics here, the way blockchain works is you end up forming contracts between different parties. So these are, I'm just going to call them contracts in an informal sense here. And what happens is, it means there's a data request set up between person A, person B, person C, and as many as you want, where they would input their information, whether that is how many CO2 emissions have you read on a meter, or how many tons of plastic have you collected today. You can upload visual information such as pictures. You can upload any external confirmation such as certificates. So all that information will be stored to a particular actor. That then gets inputted into the blockchain system. And this can be done for as many different supply chain, value chain actors. That all then would be managed through, for instance, a third party. We do it, for instance, with one of our partners. And that enables a constant record. It's clear, it's transparent. The requests obviously only fall short if it's not supplied, but then that will also make you reevaluate, do I want to be working with them? But it just helps with your overall management and governance of who you collaborate with. So whilst it's a digital element, you still have your physical chain, but there's that digital management of, with that particular person, where, you know, who have they come from with a particular product. We're talking about plastic. How is that going from point A, where it's harvested from the water, to a consumer who might use it in a reusable bottle? That can also have an identity. So it's that digital footprint and digital identity which gets managed, and you can have as many of those across the supply chain and collected. There's a nice story where we've done it with wine. So if, for instance, we're trying to understand the sustainable farming of a particular vegan brand wine or organically farmed wine, we've applied, for instance, blockchain in that instance. So you can see not just environmental, but also the social conditions. Are they being complied to? Are particular regulations with your different players being actually governed? Has the product actually gone through the steps of which you've told me it will be doing? It's easier if people would like to, for instance, have a conversation after, and we equally can have this. One of my colleagues who's a little bit more adept on that can explain a little bit more. But it's a very fun, tech-savvy way of being more transparent, governing multiple players, different type of products, and having a story and a voice which can be, the content can be created in ways which you're needed to be represented in the right content.
Okay, thank you. That's certainly helped me. I hope it's helped everybody else. So really, it's a way of securely tracing the evidence through a value chain to help us to understand these things.
And it's not just products, but also your partners.
Yeah.
So it drives that collaboration as well.
Yeah. Fantastic, thank you. So we've got a couple of questions up on the chat. Firstly, from Sarah, just to clarify, you're applying principles that Valpak used in the supermarket consumer industry to house building, and will then potentially, if it works, be looking to expand to other parts of the construction industry. So, yes, Sarah, thank you for that question, because that was something I was going to ask Matt. You started with house building, Matt, and there's obviously an ambition to roll out to commercial construction, to facilities management, to
Yeah, exactly.
infrastructure. What do you see as the challenges as moving from working with a relatively small number of large house builders to, some very big mega infrastructure projects, or projects with commercial builders, for instance?
I think the reason that we went for house builders was, as I alluded to in the presentation, what we know from our own experience is that the range of products is relatively narrow and it's repetitive, and there are also some very large dominant suppliers in those particular product groups. So by for example, if you looked at kitchens, for example, there's two primary kitchen suppliers that probably service something like 70% of the UK market. Yeah. So by going to those two suppliers, you can capture a huge amount of data and hopefully make a big impact relatively easily. So that's the first objective. And the idea of this is, like everything else, it's to show what the art of the possible is, and the fact that, yes, it's a daunting task, but it can be done and it works. What we've already got a reasonable amount of positive buy-in to from some of the big construction groups is that once we've demonstrated the principle works, you can apply those same principles to other parts of the construction market. So if, for example, you look at the fit-out market in construction, then actually that same principle that says relatively a smaller basket of products, because if you're refitting an office environment or a retail environment, then lots of ceilings, lots of plasterboard, lots of floor coverings, all of those sorts of things. So you can achieve that. What's a little more difficult and a little more complex is that you get into a major construction project, whether that be, for example, a school or a hospital or a major commercial building, then the breadth of products that's used is significantly larger. Yeah? But like everything else, once you've gathered the data, that data, whether it's used in a housing project or whether it's used in a commercial project, it's the same data. Yeah? So gather more and more data, try and get it in as rapid a fashion and as easy a fashion as you can to start, and then build on that database as you go. Interestingly, again, Reconomy's got the contacts within those major construction groups, and the appetite to do this is unquestionable. Yeah. And like most things in life, if you've got the appetite and the will to do it, then where there's a will, there's a way. Right? So to answer Sarah's question, absolutely, the idea of going into the house building sector was simply that it was the easiest one in relative terms to do, demonstrate that the principle works, and then go from there.
Brilliant, thank you, Matt. We have another question, which I guess is for any member of the panel. Somebody search from Hannah, looking for advice. The organisation I work for has pledged to eliminate single-use plastics in our office operations by the end of the year. Any advice on implementing this and meeting our goal in an environment where COVID safety has since taken priority? Would anybody like to comment on that one?
This is about moving up the supply chain, I would say. So it's about identifying, in the first instance, those products that are actually creating the waste, and then it's about identifying what the alternative solutions to that are. And if you were to join, for example, the waste group within the supply chain school, there's numerous examples, some very large businesses who've done precisely that. And there's a relatively tried and tested formula that says, okay, here's the low-hanging fruit. So working in the canteens, get rid of plastic cups, for example, and make sure you're using China cups or whatever it might happen to be. Or alternatively, get people to come in and incent them to bring in their own mugs from home, those sort of things. So those are just some relatively trivial examples, but we have significant numbers of clients and members and partners within Supply Chain School who've done precisely this, and therefore definitely worth using those materials and getting the benefit of those experiences rather than trying to reinvent the wheel.
I just want to follow up and say that we've been operating now for a couple of years collecting plastic out of rivers and oceans, and before COVID-19 we found a lot of plastic bottles, bags, all this kind of wrapping for food. We still see a lot of that, but now unfortunately we're also seeing a lot of masks and plastic gloves, like rubber gloves and these sorts of things. And it's a difficult situation because these are products that are needed at the moment, but unfortunately we do see a lot of it. So it's still really important to have these conversations about how to limit the use of single-use plastic even in these times.
Yes, thank you, Anne-Sophie. That takes me neatly to the next comment, actually, from Spagnola. PPE recycling of masks is being done by Plaxtil in France. Offices must stop use of plastic straws, plastic cutlery, plastic foam plates, plastic wraps, plastic bags, food service containers, and ask vendors to deliver without plastic wrapping, which is a really good thing to do, but very, very difficult in terms of things that are coming into the supply chain, as Matt has just discussed, actually looking to completely eliminate completely eliminate single-use packaging, plastic packaging from the supply chain is a really, really challenging thing to do. But hopefully, Hannah, we've got some advice for you there in terms of dealing with this objective. And it's very easy, and for politicians and for managers and boards of directors to declare these wonderful, bold objectives. We're going to eliminate single-use packaging without necessarily having the research and the evidence to understand how easy or how difficult that might be. I certainly had an example from one of my clients a couple of years ago. They had a Starbucks coffee shop in their factory. And they went to Starbucks and said, we want to eliminate single-use, coffee cups. So what we want to do is we want to buy coffee cups for all our staff, and we want you to supply a coffee-only service. And Starbucks said, no, we don't do that. We only supply coffee in our branded cups, so we won't do it. So they kicked out Starbucks. And they employed a local small to medium enterprise to come in and provide the catering and the coffee. And they bought all of the staff some really nice coffee cups. I mean, really high quality that they would be proud of, that they can bring into work. And the rules were, if you're a staff member and not a visitor, then basically you don't get a drink if you don't bring a cup. And everybody got used to that, and it actually saved money. The cost of the service was less than the service that they were receiving from Starbucks. So there are some really innovative ways that you can do these things, but they're quite challenging. They don't happen straight away. Okay, so we've got no more questions on the chat, so I've got loads of questions. So one for Anne-Sophie. I'm really interested to understand more about your business model. So is this something that's funded from somewhere, or do you actually make it work as a commercial business? How does the money work for you as an organization?
Well, we are for profit, so we financed ourselves the work that we do. We were backed by another company to get started, who has of course financed our startup process, because it's always you have to spend money to start to make money on this. But now we are financing it ourselves. We really believe in this one-to-one way of approaching it. So when a company approaches us and says, okay, we would like to remove this and this amount of plastic waste, we primarily have two ways that most companies choose to do it. They will either go for a set amount of plastic waste collection over a year, or they will do a version where it's based on products sold. So for example, we actually have a UK customer who sells vinyl flooring. And what they do is that for each square meter of vinyl flooring, they collect what's equal to one plastic bottle. And sell a lot of vinyl flooring, so they also
Yeah.
get to collect a lot of plastic. And this, of course, is our way to make sure that we are just being sort of a middle figure to this process, but that is the process is kind of is providing for itself. And this, of course, is the difference between us and all of the very, very great non-profit organizations that are also working with plastic collection all over the world.
That's brilliant, thank you. So this is a full commercial model, and I think it's really important to understand that in common with any organization that's taking a product, converting it into something else and selling it to somebody that needs it. So like an oil company or a mining company that digs stuff out of the ground, crushes it up, turns it into something else, and then sells it to somebody that uses it. You're no different to that. But the difference is what you're doing is, instead of digging out a non-sustainable resource out of the ground, you're actually getting something that somebody's discharged into the sea, and you're employing people who would gain some social benefit from that employment. So if we kind of think about the business model, you're no different to to a Rio Tinto or a Shell or a BP or whatever. You get stuff out of the ground, you refine it, and then you sell it, and you make some money out of that. That is an amazing and inspirational story, and I think really important. If, as you say, it's great that there are lots of charitable organizations around the world doing all this sort of stuff, but really, to make it properly financially sustainable, you need to have a good sustainable commercial model. So that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much for that.
One of the things, so when you presented Anne-Sophie the other week, and as a result, I had a look on the website and I was very impressed. I think one of the things that I really like is the combined, yes, the environmental benefit, but also the social benefit, the fact that you're using and employing people locally. One of the things that intrigued me, which I definitely want to ask you, is, so you get contributions from companies, your vinyl flooring business, etc. And I've already flagged it back into our business to say, we should be partnering with these people. So let's see where we can get that to go. One of the things that intrigued me, though, is that you don't have individuals. Is it not possible for individuals to contribute and say, I'd like to sponsor whatever amount of tons or whatever? Or how does that work?
Not at the moment. It's something that might be on the drawing board. But like I said in the beginning of the presentation, we believe that everybody should join forces. So that, of course, could also include private people, but we also believe that it should be the strongest hands that should carry this. And for us to make sure that we actually get some substantial amounts, some really big volumes going in terms of collection, this is why we're approaching companies, because they do have the means to do this and they also want to do it. So this is why we've started it this way, and this is why we are only approaching companies at the moment. But this might change in the future, because of course we are being approached also by people on individual level who would love to get involved in this. It requires a little bit of a different business model and handling, but of course, I mean, if there is a need and a want to be able to provide to this, of course we would like to be open to that as well.
Okay, thank you. Really good.
Brilliant, thank you. So we have another question. I guess this is one for Matt, because I don't know the answer to it. So, go on, Matt.
Yeah, okay. So the answer to the question is yes, that the reporting is required. Yes, it is consolidated up. Who's responsible for that? The EA, DEFRA, and there's a lot of work going on that at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Matt. So Environment Agency is the place to go for the data. But I think recognition that it's certainly not perfect at a national level, despite the efforts of businesses like yours to report accurately, and the issues of consistency of data and consistency of ways of measuring, I guess, are not unusual all around the world. It's not just a UK related problem. Okay, we have one final question. Great deliveries. I'm wondering, does the ReSea project have any intentions for Africa? We have enormous issues of plastic waste here. And why did you choose Indonesia first, Anne-Sophie?
Well, yeah, it's a bit of a pick and choose game. No, like I explained, Indonesia is one of the countries in the world really affected by plastic pollution, both their own, but also unfortunately illegal import from countries from Europe and the US.
Mm.
So that's one reason. But what Indonesia is also really good at is actually recycling plastic waste in a completely different. They have a completely different story about it than we do here in Europe, because it's just been more important to deal with the plastic because they have so much of it. So that was sort of the reasons why we chose to get started in Indonesia. It's definitely our plans in the future to scale to other countries. And this is not the first time that somebody has asked me about the African region. What we try to do with the processes that we are implementing today in Indonesia is to try to find a way to make a process that we can move. And of course, countries in Africa are completely different countries than Indonesia and other countries. But we do see, of course, some similarities working with local low-income groups. There will be other social issues or social challenges we would have to face there. But we're trying to make the processes so that we can actually implement it other places. And Africa and the African region is definitely on the map for the future. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. So I'd just like to try and summarise what we've heard, and then maybe ask our speakers if you have any final points before we close. So what we've heard about today is a little bit about the way that the UK is going in terms of legislation around plastics, and then an understanding around the kind of complexities that we're dealing with in single-use plastics around the world, particularly the issues Nikki covered of traceability and understanding whether you can really trust products that you buy, either commercially or personally in the business to consumer world. Do we really understand where those products are coming from, what they're made of, if they claim to be recycled, what are they, and use of techniques and technology to do that, including the world's first certification system around ocean plastics. And then we heard from Anne-Sophie about, kind of what's happening on the ground in Indonesia in ways of delivering both social value and environmental benefit in collecting plastics from the ocean, but also having a certifiable chain of custody to demonstrate where those plastics have come from. But then, most importantly for me, actually making a business out of that, and making that a commercial enterprise. And then finally from Matt, some amazing statistics which do just blow the mind. Thank you for that. But also really starting to understand how the UK construction industry is starting to address that challenge. And it's fascinating to look at work that was being done 10 or 15 years ago by the supermarkets is only just being adopted by the construction sector. And with the plastic tax coming, the size of the liability is massive. It's potentially a huge burden on the sector. So, the retail sector is ready. They've got their data. They know where their plastics are coming from, and they've done lots in this space. So it really kind of highlights the difference between various different sectors in the UK alone, let alone differences around the world. So a fascinating series of presentations. Thank you for that. What I'm going to do now is just to close and just go around the virtual room of our speakers to ask if you have any final points, and then we'll close. So if I maybe start with Nikki, any final thoughts from you?
I think my one point to really stress at the end of this is it's very much about, if we're going to be trying to have a fully transparent and traceable system, it isn't just the case of complying to regulations. One of the things we've heard throughout today is very much about collaboration. It's about partnerships. It's about working together to really try and eliminate the problem whilst also trying to address what is currently in our system. So I think for me, that's one of the key themes which I've heard throughout. And this isn't just from collecting to selling, but this is about what can we do with that plastic waste at the end of it? How can we innovate? Who's going to be able to use that waste product in effect. So that's, I think, for me, one of the home factors which have just been communicated today.
Brilliant, thank you. And Sophie?
Well, it's just first and foremost, I just want to thank for also the great speaks from Matt and Nikki as well. And I think what I will take with me from today's webinar is really that there is definitely a lot of innovation, and there is a lot of wanting to implement some really great strategies towards a more sustainable future. And I think today really proves that the corporate level has a really important part to play here. We also pose a lot. A lot of it comes from industries, and it's really great to see that it's also the industries and the businesses that are then taking on the challenge to do something about it. So
Brilliant, thank you. And Matt?
Yeah, thanks. So secondly, or seconding what Anne Sophie said, thanks to you, Shaun, for the opportunity to speak. I think what the main thing that struck me over the course of the last hour or so is that, yes, it is a daunting task. And if you look at what we're trying to do in our little initiative in the construction sector within the UK, you know, it's a daunting task. But what the grocery sector demonstrates is it's been done before, and therefore it can be done. It's not unachievable. And I take a huge amount of confidence from the fact that, you know, as I said, where there's a will, there's a way. And I don't ever recall in a long career now being in a situation where there's so much will to improve a current situation. It's really, really pleasing to see. And I think the points that have been made today about connectivity and collaboration really resonate with me. And I think that connectivity, that collaboration, and that will to actually improve the situation says, you know, we've got a really, really good opportunity to make this happen. And link that then with the commercial stuff that you've talked about with the plastic tax. And like most things in life, if it's the right thing to do and there's a commercial incentive to do it, it's very likely that it'll happen. Yeah.
Okay, so thanks to everyone for joining. Thanks once again to our speakers for their inspirational session. Thank you.